On November 14, 1976, Harold Kemp made his final broadcast from the ham radio station he'd operated for 23 years in the back room of his house outside Odessa, Texas. At 11:47 p.m., according to his logbook, he signed off with his usual call sign, Whiskey 5 Alpha Bravo Kilo, and noted a clear signal on the 40-meter band. At 12:03 a.m., his wife found him slumped over his Heathkit receiver, the headphones still pressed to his ears. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, natural causes, case closed in 4 days. But they didn't explain why every radio within 3 miles of the Kemp house had picked up the same transmission at the moment of his death, a voice on frequency 1610 AM, reading a list of names. 7 names. Harold Kemp's was the third. Claire Dunaway had been writing for the Midland Reporter-Telegram for 11 years when the Kemp file crossed her desk. She hadn't asked for it. Her editor, a man named Phipps who smelled like pipe tobacco and regret, had dropped it on her desk with a single instruction. Background piece on ham radio operators for the Sunday supplement. Human interest. Keep it light. But Claire had a habit that made her unsuitable for light assignments. She read everything. And in the Kemp file, between the coroner's report and the widow's statement, she found a carbon copy of an FCC complaint dated November 12th, 2 days before Harold Kemp died. The complaint alleged that an unlicensed broadcast on frequency 1610 AM was interfering with emergency services. The complainant was Harold Kemp. The FCC field office in Lubbock was a concrete building that looked like it had been designed to survive a nuclear war and then forgotten. Claire found it on a Tuesday morning, the wind carrying red dust across the parking lot in horizontal sheets. Inside, a clerk with a complexion like old newspapers sat behind a counter that hadn't been updated since Eisenhower. Claire asked about the Kemp complaint. The clerk's expression didn't change, but his hands stopped moving.
That file's been pulled.
Pulled where?
Regional. Fort Worth.
You'd have to submit a Freedom of Information request. For a ham radio interference complaint?
The clerk looked at her for a long moment. Then he wrote something on a piece of paper and slid it across the counter. A name, Dale Puckett, and an address in Monahans. Monahans was 40 minutes west on Interstate 20, a town that existed because oil existed and would disappear when the oil did. Dale Puckett lived in a house that backed up against the dunes, the sand piled against his fence like it was trying to reclaim the property. He was 62 years old and had worked for the FCC for 31 years. He'd retired 4 months ago. Claire found him in his garage, rebuilding a carburetor.
Mr. Puckett, I'm Claire Dunaway with the Reporter-Telegram. I'm writing about Harold Kemp.
Puckett's hand stopped moving. He didn't look up.
I figured someone would come eventually.
You investigated the complaint?
I investigated a lot of complaints. Interference, unlicensed broadcasts, signal piracy. 20 years of complaints. But I only got pulled off one.
This one?
3 days in. They said Fort Worth was taking over. Special circumstances. I never heard what the circumstances were.
Claire sat on an overturned bucket while Puckett talked. His voice was flat, the voice of a man who had learned to deliver facts without interpretation.
Kemp filed his complaint on November 12th. Said he'd been hearing a broadcast on 1610 AM for about a week. Voice transmission, not code. Same time every night, between 11 and midnight. He couldn't make out the words at first, but he could tell it wasn't normal radio traffic. No call signs, no station identification, just talking.
What was it saying?
Names. That's what Kemp said. Just names. He wrote down the ones he could hear, sent them with the complaint.
Do you remember them?
Puckett finally looked at her. His eyes were the color of old concrete.
I remember one. Because I knew him. Earl Jessup. Ran a feed store in Kermit. He'd been dead for 6 months when Kemp heard his name on the radio.
Claire drove back to Midland with the windows down, the wind too loud to think. Earl Jessup. She wrote the name on her notepad at a gas station in Wicket, then added what Puckett had told her. Feed store. Kermit. Dead 6 months before the broadcast. At the newspaper office, she pulled the morgue files for June through November. Earl Jessup's obituary was dated May 19, 1976. Heart attack. Survived by his wife and 2 sons. Nothing unusual. She pulled the next name Puckett had remembered. Martha Cobb. Obituary dated August 3rd. Stroke. Survived by her daughter. Also nothing unusual. Then she found the third name, the one Puckett had hesitated to say. Vernon Slade. No obituary. But there was a news story from September. Vernon Slade, 44, of Crane, had died in a single-vehicle accident on Farm Road 1053. His truck had gone off the road at 3 in the morning. No witnesses, no explanation. The Kemp house was on a county road 7 miles east of Odessa, a one-story ranch with a radio tower in the backyard that looked like it belonged on a commercial station. Dorothy Kemp answered the door on the third knock. She was a small woman with hair the color of iron filings, and she looked at Claire's press credentials without reading them.
You're the third person to come asking about Harold.
Who were the others?
First was a man from the government. FCC, he said. That was 3 days after Harold died. Second was another man, didn't say who he was with. He came the day after the funeral.
What did they want?
The first one wanted Harold's logbooks. The second one wanted the same thing. But by then, the first one had already taken them.
All of them?
All but one. Harold kept a separate book for that frequency. I don't think the first man knew about it.
The logbook was a spiral-bound notebook with a blue cover, hidden in the bottom of a sewing basket. Dorothy Kemp handed it to Claire like it was something dangerous.
Harold started keeping it separate about 2 weeks before he died. Said he didn't want it mixed in with the regular logs. Said it was different.
Claire opened it. Harold Kemp's handwriting was small and precise. The handwriting of a man who had spent decades recording frequencies and call signs. The first entry was dated November 3rd, 1976. 11:17 p.m. Frequency 1610 a.m. Signal strong. Voice transmission. Male. No identifiable accent. Content. Names. List follows. Below that, 7 names in a column. Earl Jessup was first. Martha Cobb was second. Vernon Slade was fourth. And at the bottom of the list, in handwriting that had begun to shake, Harold Kemp. Claire counted the names. 7. She recognized 3 from her morgue search. The other 4 meant nothing to her yet.
Mrs. Kemp, did Harold know these people?
Some of them. Earl Jessup, he knew from the radio club. Vernon Slade, I think Harold sold him a receiver once. The others, I don't know.
Did Harold ever say what he thought the broadcast was?
Dorothy Kemp looked out the window at the radio tower, its guy wires singing in the wind.
He said it sounded like someone reading from a list, like roll call. He said whoever was doing it knew things they shouldn't know. Names of dead people. Names of people who weren't dead yet. He filed that complaint because he thought someone was using the radio to keep track.
Keep track of what?
He never said. But the night he died, he told me he'd finally figured out where the signal was coming from.
Claire found the 4 remaining names in the county records office the next morning. William Hargrove, deceased July 19th, car accident. Luella French, deceased September 8th, house fire, both from Crane County. The 6th name, Robert Mattingly, had no death record, but she found the missing persons report filed October 29th. His wife had last seen him leaving for work at the oil field. He never arrived. The 7th name on Harold Kemp's list was a man named Boyd Yancey. No death record. No missing persons report. No record at all in Ector, Crane, or Ward counties. Claire wrote the name in her notebook and circled it 3 times. 6 dead or missing, 1 unknown. And Harold Kemp, who had heard his own name on the radio 11 days before his heart stopped. She drove back to Monahan's to ask Dale Puckett about the names. His garage door was closed. His wife said he'd left that morning for a fishing trip and wouldn't be back for a week. She didn't know where. Boyd Yancey. Claire started with the phone book. Nothing in Midland, Odessa, or any of the surrounding counties. She tried the newspaper's Stringer network, calling reporters in Big Spring, Pecos, and Fort Stockton. Nobody recognized the name. On the third day, she called the Crane County Sheriff's Office and asked if they had any record of a Boyd Yancey. The deputy who answered put her on hold for 4 minutes. When he came back, his voice had changed.
Ma'am, can I ask why you're looking for that name?
I'm a reporter. I'm writing about radio interference complaints.
Radio interference.
That's right.
There was a long pause. Claire could hear someone talking in the background, too quiet to make out.
Ma'am, I'm going to have to call you back.
He didn't call back. But the next morning, Claire found a note on her desk. No signature, just an address in Crane and 3 words. Ask about the tower. The address led to a house on the edge of Crane, a town of 3,000 people who mostly worked for the oil companies that had names like Planets, Gulf, Texaco, Sun. The house belonged to a woman named Vera Jessup, Earl Jessup's widow. She was sitting on her porch when Claire pulled up, like she'd been waiting.
You're the reporter asking about Boyd Yancey.
Word travels fast.
In a town this size, word is the only thing that does. You want to know about Yancey, you need to understand something first. My husband didn't die of a heart attack. The coroner said he did, and I signed the papers because I had 2 boys to raise and no energy to fight. But Earl Jessup was 51 years old and could carry a 100-pound feed sack in each hand. His heart was fine.
What do you think happened?
I think he found out what that tower was for, and I think they made sure he couldn't tell anyone.
Vera Jessup spoke without looking at Claire. Her eyes stayed fixed on the oil derricks pumping in the distance, their slow rhythm like a heartbeat.
Earl was in the radio club with Harold Kemp. They'd been friends for years. Both of them got interested in that signal around the same time, first week of November. Earl called me one night, said he and Harold had triangulated the source, said it was coming from an old relay station about 15 miles north of here. Abandoned since the 50s, he said, supposed to be empty.
But it wasn't?
Earl drove out there the next day. When he came back, he wouldn't tell me what he saw, just said he needed to make some calls. He was on the phone half the night. Next morning, he was dead in his chair.
Who was he calling?
I don't know, but he wrote down one name before he died. Boyd Yancey. Said Yancey was the key to the whole thing.
Do you still have what he wrote?
I burned it. After the second man came asking questions, I burned everything.
Claire asked about the second man. Vera Jessup's hands tightened on the arms of her chair.
He came 2 days after Earl's funeral. Said he was from the FCC, but he didn't look like any government man I ever saw. Too young, too polished. He asked about Earl's radio equipment, his logbooks, any recordings he might have made.
Did Earl make recordings?
He had a reel-to-reel setup, used it to record interesting signals. The man asked about it specifically. I told him I didn't know anything about Earl's radio business, which was true enough. He looked at me like he knew I was lying. Then he said something I'll never forget.
What?
He said, "Mrs. Jessup, some frequencies aren't meant to be heard. Your husband understood that at the end. I hope you will too." Then he left. I never saw him again, but I started locking my doors after that.
Claire wrote it down. Some frequencies aren't meant to be heard. It sounded like a warning. Or a threat. The abandoned relay station was marked on a 1952 survey map that Claire found in the county assessor's office. It sat on 40 acres of scrubland that had been purchased by the federal government in 1943, used for some kind of communications facility during the war, and officially decommissioned in 1956. The current owner, according to the tax rolls, was something called Permian Basin Development Corporation. Claire had never heard of it. She drove north out of Crane on a county road that turned to gravel after 6 miles, then to dirt after 8. The land was flat and brown and empty, the kind of terrain that made you understand why people went crazy out here. She almost missed the building. It was concrete, low to the ground, the color of the dirt around it. No signs, no fence, just a structure that looked like it had been built to be forgotten. And behind it, rising against the pale sky, a radio tower that definitely wasn't abandoned. The red aircraft warning light at its top was blinking. Claire parked 50 yards from the building and sat in her car, watching. The tower was newer than the structure below it. She could tell by the metal, which hadn't yet taken on the rust of the older equipment visible around the property. There were no vehicles, no signs of occupation. But someone was maintaining that tower. Someone was paying the electric bill for that blinking light. She got out of the car. The wind was constant out here, a low whistle that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She walked toward the building, her footsteps crunching on the hard-packed dirt. The door was steel, painted the same color as the concrete. No handle on the outside. No windows. She walked around to the back and found a second door, this one with a heavy padlock. Through a gap in the frame, she could see something inside. A faint orange glow. The color of vacuum tubes warming up. Claire was reaching for her camera when she heard the engine. A truck was coming up the dirt road, moving fast, trailing a cloud of dust that rose 50 feet in the air. She walked back to her car, making no attempt to hide. By the time the truck arrived, a white Ford with government plates, she was leaning against her door, notepad in hand. The driver was a man in his 30s, clean-shaven, wearing a khaki uniform with no insignia. He stopped 10 feet away and rolled down his window.
This is restricted property. You need to leave.
I'm a reporter. I'm looking into some FCC complaints about signal interference.
There's no signal equipment here. This facility has been decommissioned for 20 years.
Then why is that tower running?
The driver's expression didn't change. He reached for something on his passenger seat, a radio handset.
Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave now. This is your only warning.
Claire got in her car, but she noted his license plate number and the frequency on his radio when he made his call. 1610 a.m. Back in Midland, Claire ran the license plate through a contact at the DMV. The truck was registered to Permian Basin Development Corporation, the same entity that owned the land. The corporation's registered address was a P.O. box in Midland. Its registered agent was a law firm in Houston. She called the law firm. The receptionist said Permian Basin Development was a private holding company and that all inquiries should be directed to their client services department. Claire asked for the client services number. The receptionist said there wasn't one. She hung up. Claire sat at her desk and looked at her notes. A dead radio operator. An abandoned facility that wasn't abandoned. A corporation that didn't want to be found. And a list of names being broadcast on a frequency that shouldn't exist. 7 names. 6 dead or missing. 1 unknown. She picked up the phone and called the one person who might be able to help. The Crane County coroner who had signed Earl Jessup's death certificate. Dr. Marvin Good had been the Crane County coroner for 18 years. He was 64 years old, had a practice on Main Street, and had seen enough death in the oil fields to fill a cemetery. Claire found him closing up his office at 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening.
Dr. Good, I'm looking into the death of Earl Jessup. I understand you signed the death certificate.
Heart attack. May 19th. What about it?
His widow doesn't believe it was a heart attack.
Good paused with his hand on the light switch. He was a thin man with a face like a drought, all lines and no moisture.
Mrs. Jessup is a grieving woman. People don't always accept what they can't explain.
Was there anything unusual about the body?
Miss Dunaway, I've been signing death certificates in this county since before you were born. I know what a heart attack looks like.
That's not what I asked.
Good turned off the light In the darkness, his voice sounded older.
There was nothing unusual. That's my professional opinion. Now, if you'll excuse me.
Claire watched Good drive away in a Buick the color of dried blood. He'd lied to her. She was certain of it. But proving it would require the death certificate, the autopsy report, and access to records that a small-town coroner would never voluntarily release. She needed leverage. She found it the next morning in the newspaper morgue. Dr. Marvin Good had signed 4 death certificates in the past 6 months that matched names on Harold Kemp's list. Earl Jessup, William Hargrove, Luella French, and Vernon Slade, the man who had driven off Farm Road 1053 at 3 in the morning. All 4 deaths had been ruled natural or accidental. All 4 had been processed without autopsy, and all 4 had been signed by the same coroner, in a county that averaged 12 deaths per year. Claire did the math. 4 deaths in 6 months, all connected to a radio broadcast, all certified by one man. Either Dr. Marvin Good was the unluckiest coroner in Texas, or he was part of whatever was happening at that relay station. Claire drove back to Crane that afternoon, but instead of going to Good's office, she went to the county courthouse. The clerk's office kept copies of all death certificates filed in the county. She requested the 4 files. The clerk, a young woman with a perm that looked like it had been applied with a blowtorch, took her request without comment. 10 minutes later, she came back empty-handed.
Those files have been transferred.
Transferred where?
State Records Office in Austin. It's standard procedure for cases under review.
Under review by whom?
The clerk looked at her notepad, then back at Claire. Her expression was the carefully neutral face of someone who had been told not to answer questions.
I don't have that information, Ma'am. You'd have to contact Austin.
Claire was about to press further when she noticed something on the clerk's desk. A business card. Permian Basin Development Corporation. The same company that owned the relay station. Claire took a photograph of the business card with her Minolta before the clerk noticed. That night, in her apartment, she developed the film in her makeshift darkroom and studied the image under a magnifying glass. The card was simple. Permian Basin Development Corporation, a Midland P.O. box, and a phone number. But in the corner, almost too small to read, was a logo. An antenna tower with radio waves emanating from it. Below the logo, 3 letters. FRC. Claire knew those letters. The Federal Radio Commission, the predecessor to the FCC, dissolved in 1934. Why would a company founded in the 1970s use the logo of an agency that hadn't existed for 40 years? She pulled her research files and started cross-referencing. The Federal Radio Commission had been responsible for frequency allocation, broadcast licensing, and something else. Something that had been classified during the war years and never fully declassified. She found a reference in a 1946 congressional hearing transcript. Project Nightside. Purpose: unknown. Status: terminated. All records sealed. Project Nightside. Claire called every contact she had, reporters in Washington, historians at the University of Texas, even a retired Army signals officer she'd interviewed for a story 3 years ago. Nobody had heard of it. The congressional transcript was the only reference she could find, and the hearing itself had been about something else entirely. Nightside was mentioned in passing, as if the speaker had assumed everyone knew what it was. She was about to give up when her phone rang at 11 o'clock at night. The voice on the other end was male, older, with the flat accent of West Texas.
Miss Dunaway, you've been asking about Nightside.
Who is this?
Someone who worked on it. A long time ago. Before they shut it down.
What was it?
A listening program. We weren't supposed to broadcast, just receive. But someone figured out that certain frequencies could do more than carry voices. They could carry predictions.
Predictions of what?
Death. Miss Dunaway. The frequency predicts death.
The line went dead. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with a pot of coffee and her notes spread out in front of her, trying to make sense of what she'd heard. A listening program. Frequencies that predicted death. It sounded insane. The kind of thing you'd read in a supermarket tabloid between stories about UFOs and Bigfoot. But the facts didn't lie. 7 names on a broadcast. 6 people dead or missing. A government facility that officially didn't exist. A coroner signing death certificates without autopsies. And now a voice on the phone claiming the whole thing was part of a program called Nightside. She made a list of what she knew and what she didn't know. She knew the broadcast was real. Harold Kemp had heard it, recorded it, and died. She knew the relay station was active. She'd seen the tower, the orange glow of equipment inside. She knew someone was covering up the deaths, the transferred files, the evasive officials, the threatening visit to Vera Jessup. What she didn't know was who was behind it and what they were trying to hide. The next morning, Claire went to the one place she hadn't tried, the Midland Public Library. The reference section had a complete archive of FCC frequency allocations going back to 1934. She pulled the volumes for 1940 through 1956 and started searching. Frequency 1610 AM had been allocated to the War Department in 1942 for unspecified communications purposes. The allocation had been renewed every year until 1956, when it was transferred to something called the Office of Special Communications, an agency Claire had never heard of. After 1956, the allocation disappeared from the public records entirely. But in the 1955 volume, she found a footnote. Frequency 1610 AM. See Restricted Addendum, File 7-G, National Archives. Claire copied the reference number. Then she called the National Archives in Washington and asked about File 7-G. The archivist who answered told her the file had been destroyed in 1974. Standard procedure for outdated classified material. But he mentioned something else. A duplicate had been sent to the Regional Record Center in Fort Worth before the destruction order came through. The regional center was 45 minutes away. The Fort Worth Federal Record Center was a warehouse on the edge of the stockyards, a building that smelled like old paper and cattle. Claire arrived at 2 in the afternoon with her press credentials and a story about researching historical radio regulations. The clerk, an overweight man with a comb-over that fooled no one, led her to a reading room and brought her a single cardboard box. Inside were 3 folders. The first contained technical specifications for broadcast equipment, frequencies, power outputs, antenna configurations. The second contained personnel records for something called Station X7, located in Crane County, Texas. Active from 1943 to 1956. Staff of 12. Purpose, classified. The third folder was mostly empty, but at the bottom she found a single sheet of paper, a memo dated March 15, 1956, from the Director of the Office of Special Communications to all station commanders. The memo was brief. Project Nightside is hereby terminated. All equipment to be decommissioned. All personnel reassigned. All records destroyed. Under no circumstances is monitoring to continue. The frequency is no longer stable. Claire read the last line 3 times. The frequency is no longer stable. Someone had ignored that order. Claire drove back to Midland with the memo in her bag. She'd slipped it out while the clerk wasn't looking. It was theft, technically. She didn't care. That night, she spread everything she had across her living room floor. The newspaper clippings, the death certificates she'd photographed, the FCC complaint, Harold Kemp's logbook, the memo from 1956. She stood in the middle of it all and tried to see the pattern. Project Nightside had been a government program that used frequency 1610 AM for some kind of monitoring, listening for something. The program had been shut down in 1956 because the frequency was no longer stable. But the relay station in Crane County was still active. Someone had restarted the program, and whoever was running it now wasn't just listening. They were broadcasting. A list of names. People who were about to die. Claire looked at her notes on Boyd Yancey. The seventh name, the one with no record. If the pattern held, Yancey was either dead, about to die, or something else. She needed to find him before anyone else did. Boyd Yancey finally turned up in a place Claire hadn't thought to look. The Crane County Tax Assessor's records from 1955. He'd owned 40 acres of land north of Crane, the same 40 acres now registered to Permian Basin Development Corporation. He'd sold the property to the federal government in 1943 for $1,200. The sale document listed his occupation as radio engineer. Claire felt something click into place. Yancey hadn't just been a name on a list. He'd been part of Project Nightside. He'd sold his land for the relay station. And now, 20 years after the project was supposedly terminated, his name was being broadcast on the same frequency he'd helped build. She found his forwarding address in the 1956 county directory, a house in Wink, 30 miles south. She drove there the next morning, not knowing if she'd find a dead man, a living witness, or an empty lot. What she found was worse. The house was still standing, and Boyd Yancey was sitting on the porch, waiting for her. He was 91 years old, and he was wearing a set of headphones connected to a radio receiver that glowed with orange light. Boyd Yancey looked at Claire with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything.
You're the reporter, the one asking questions.
How do you know that?
I hear things. On the frequency.
He gestured to the headphones around his neck. Up close, Claire could see the receiver was old. Vacuum tubes, hand-soldered connections, the kind of equipment that hadn't been manufactured in 30 years.
Mr. Yancey, I found your name on a list of people who died after being broadcast on frequency 1610.
I know. I heard my name 3 months ago. Same night Harold Kemp heard his.
But you're still alive.
I know how to listen. The others didn't. They heard their names and they panicked. Fear kills faster than any frequency.
What is the frequency? What does it do?
Yancey's hands trembled as he adjusted a dial on the receiver.
It doesn't do anything. It just knows. We built it to listen for enemy transmissions during the war, but it started picking up something else. Something that wasn't there yet.
Yancey's voice was steady, but his hands never stopped moving, adjusting dials, checking connections, as if the radio might stop working at any moment.
The frequency doesn't broadcast death. It receives it. From somewhere, ahead. We never understood how. The engineers said it was impossible. The military said it was useful. For a while, we used it to predict casualties, troop movements, accidents. It saved lives. Then someone decided to start broadcasting the names instead of just receiving them.
Why?
Control. If you know who's going to die, you can decide who finds out. You can use that information, sell it, trade it. We shut the program down in '56 because the frequency was becoming unstable. The predictions were coming faster, more names, more deaths. But someone restarted it. Someone who didn't care about stability. Someone who saw an opportunity.
Who?
Yancey looked at her for a long moment. Then he wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to her.
The man who took over the project after we shut it down. He's still running it. From that station you visited.
The paper said, Harlan Whitfield, Permian Basin Development Corporation. And below that, he's expecting you. Claire sat in her car outside Yancey's house for 20 minutes, staring at the name. Harlan Whitfield. She'd never heard of him. But he'd heard of her. Had been expecting her, according to Yancey. That meant she'd been watched from the beginning. Every visit, every phone call, every question. Someone had been tracking her investigation, and instead of stopping her, they'd let her get closer. Why? She drove back to Midland and went straight to the newspaper morgue. Harlan Whitfield appeared in exactly one article, a 1958 business section brief about the formation of Permian Basin Development Corporation. He was listed as the company's founder and sole director. No photograph, no biographical information. The company's stated purpose was land development and mineral rights acquisition. Claire checked the county records. Permian Basin Development owned property in 6 West Texas counties, all of it former government land, all of it near radio towers that had been built during World War II. She was looking at a map of the company's holdings when her editor, Phipps, appeared at her desk.
Dunaway, there's someone here to see you.
Who?
Says his name is Whitfield.
Harlan Whitfield was not what Claire expected. He was in his 60s, thin, with silver hair and the kind of suit that cost more than her car. He sat in the chair across from her desk like he owned it, like he owned everything.
Miss Dunaway, you've been very persistent.
You've been watching me.
Monitoring. There's a difference. I monitor everything that happens near my facilities. It's how I've stayed in business for 20 years.
The business of predicting death?
Whitfield smiled. It didn't reach his eyes.
The business of information. Death is just one variable. The frequency picks up many things: market movements, weather patterns, political outcomes. Death simply happens to be the most reliable.
You're selling predictions.
I'm providing a service. There are people who will pay a great deal to know what's coming. Insurance companies, investors, governments. The frequency doesn't lie. It just knows.
And the people whose names get broadcast? Harold Kemp? Earl Jessup? They just happen to die?
Everyone dies, Miss Dunaway. The frequency just knows when.
Claire kept her voice steady, though her hands wanted to shake.
The people on that list didn't just die. They were killed. Vernon Slade's truck didn't go off the road by accident. Luella French's house didn't catch fire by itself. You're not predicting death. You're causing it.
An interesting theory.
It's more than a theory. I have Harold Kemp's logbook. I have the 1956 termination memo. I have a witness who helped build the original program.
For the first time, something flickered in Whitfield's expression. Not fear. Calculation.
Boyd Yancey. A senile old man who hears voices on the radio. Not exactly a credible source.
He's credible enough, and so is Dr. Good. How many death certificates did you pay him to sign without autopsy? 4? 5? What happens when someone starts asking him questions under oath?
Nothing happens, Miss Dunaway. Because you're not going to publish this story.
And why is that?
Because I know something the frequency told me. About you.
He leaned forward.
Your name was on last night's broadcast.
Claire felt the blood drain from her face. But she didn't look away.
That's a threat.
It's information. The same information I sell to my clients. Your name appeared on frequency 1610 at 11:43 last night. The same time Harold Kemp's name appeared. The same time Earl Jessup's name appeared. You have approximately 72 hours.
You're saying I'm going to die in 3 days.
I'm saying the frequency predicts you will. What you do with that information is up to you. You could spend your last days writing a story no one will publish. Or you could accept my offer.
What offer?
Walk away. Forget what you've learned. I'll make sure the frequency reconsiders.
You can change the predictions?
I can influence them. The frequency responds to certain inputs. Names can be added. Names can be removed. It's not magic, Miss Dunaway. It's technology. Very old technology that no one else understands.
Claire stood up. Her legs felt weak, but her voice was steady.
I'll take my chances with the frequency.
Whitfield left without another word. Claire sat at her desk until the newsroom emptied, until the cleaning crew came and went, until the building was silent. Then she pulled out her typewriter and started writing. Not the story she'd planned, the careful, documented investigation with sources and evidence. Instead, she wrote what she knew, what she believed, and what she couldn't prove. She wrote about Project Nightside and the frequency that predicted death. She wrote about Harlan Whitfield and Permian Basin Development Corporation. She wrote about the 7 names and the 6 deaths and the one man who was still alive because he knew how to listen. She wrote until her fingers ached and the sky outside turned gray with dawn. Then she sealed the pages in an envelope, addressed it to the managing editor of the Houston Chronicle, and dropped it in the mail slot on her way home. If she died in the next 72 hours, someone would read it. If she lived, she'd follow up with the evidence. Either way, the story would exist. That was the only power she had left. Claire slept for 3 hours, then drove back to Crane County. She had 72 hours, maybe less, enough time to do one thing: find proof that Whitfield was killing people, not just predicting their deaths. She started with Vernon Slade. His truck had gone off Farm Road 1053 at 3 in the morning. The sheriff's report said he'd fallen asleep at the wheel. But the road was straight and flat for 10 miles in either direction. Claire drove it herself, looking for something, anything, that might explain why a man would lose control on a road with no curves, no obstacles, no reason to crash. She found it 6 miles from where Slade's truck had been discovered. A power line ran across the road, supported by wooden poles on either side. The pole on the south side had been replaced recently. The wood was new, the hardware shiny. She pulled over and examined it. At the base, hidden in the weeds, she found a junction box. Inside the junction box was a radio receiver. Frequency, 1610 AM. Claire photographed everything: the junction box, the receiver, the frequency dial set to 1610. Then she drove to Luella French's property, the house that had burned down in September. The lot was empty now, just a concrete foundation and a few charred timbers. But the neighboring property had a barn, and on the barn was a small antenna. Claire knocked on the farmhouse door. The woman who answered was in her 70s, with a face like a dried apple.
Ma'am, I'm a reporter. I'm investigating the fire that killed your neighbor.
Luella, poor thing, fell asleep with a cigarette, they said.
That antenna on your barn, was it there before the fire?
No. Some company put it up about a month before. Said they were testing radio signals. Paid us $50 for the use of the barn.
Do you remember the name of the company?
Something about development. Permian, maybe?
Claire had what she needed. Whitfield wasn't just predicting deaths. He was engineering them, using the frequency to trigger accidents, fires, heart attacks. The radio receivers weren't listening. They were transmitting something that killed. Claire had 48 hours left by her count. She drove to the relay station one more time. The white truck wasn't there. The building looked the same, concrete, windowless, forgettable. But this time, she didn't stop at the perimeter. She drove straight up to the back door and got out with a tire iron in her hand. The padlock was old. It took 3 swings to break it. Inside, the building was exactly what she'd expected: a broadcast station. Banks of radio equipment lined the walls, all of it running, vacuum tubes glowing orange in the dim light. In the center of the room was a desk with a microphone and a stack of papers. Claire picked up the top sheet. It was a list of names. 37 names, each one followed by a date. Her name was near the bottom, dated November 26th, 2 days from now. She photographed the list. Then she found the main power switch and pulled it. The orange glow died. The hum of equipment stopped. The room went silent. Outside, she heard an engine approaching. Whitfield's white truck, coming fast. Claire didn't run. She stood in the doorway of the relay station and waited. The truck stopped 20 feet away. Whitfield got out, followed by the driver she'd seen before, the man in the khaki uniform. Both of them were carrying flashlights. Neither of them was carrying a weapon, at least not one she could see.
You've made a mistake, Miss Dunaway.
I've made several, but this isn't one of them.
She held up her camera.
I have photographs of every piece of equipment in that building. I have photographs of the receiver at Vernon Slade's crash site. I have photographs of the antenna at Luella French's neighbor's barn. And I have photographs of your list. 37 names, 37 dates, 37 people you're planning to kill.
That equipment is government property. Those photographs are classified.
Then I guess we'll both have some explaining to do. The envelope I mailed this morning has copies of everything. If I don't show up at the Houston Chronicle in 48 hours, they'll publish it all.
Whitfield's face went pale in the flashlight beam.
You're bluffing.
Try me.
3 days later, Claire Dunaway walked into the offices of the Houston Chronicle with a folder of photographs and a 12-page story. The Chronicle ran it on December 1st, 1976, above the fold. The FBI opened an investigation the same day. Harlan Whitfield was arrested at his home in Midland and charged with 6 counts of murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Dr. Marvin Good was arrested the following week. The relay station was seized by federal agents, who found equipment that dated back to 1943, and a frequency that had been broadcasting names for 20 years. Boyd Yancey testified at the trial. So did Dale Puckett. So did Vera Jessup. Whitfield was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life without parole. The frequency was shut down permanently, or so the government claimed. Claire Dunaway went back to the Reporter Telegram and kept writing. She never heard her name on the radio again, but sometimes, late at night, she'd tune her receiver to 1610 AM and listen to the static, just to be sure it was still silent.